All right. Good evening, everyone. Clear up. Just about everything. There we go. That's better. All right. So, we got, I think I said I'm going to cover 4 through 7 on War and Peace. So, we'll try that. By the way, I'm Jaime. Welcome to a Tuesday Serious Story. Last Tuesday we covered, let's say 1 through 3, I think. Was there a prelude? That's what I'll have to check. Let's. This. Working. Focus. There we go. My book reloaded. You think it'd be easier on a tablet, but sometimes it's not. Alright. Heading into Chapter 4. In Chapter 3, Pierre caused quite a scene with the Abbé, and Anna Pavlovna is trying to keep everything under control as best she can. However, in Chapter 4, just then another visitor entered the drawing room, Prince Andrew Bolkonsky, the little princess's husband. He was a very handsome young man of medium height, with firm, clear-cut features. Everything about him, from his weary, bored expression to his quite measured step, offered a contrast to his quiet little wife. Excuse me. Since you're not working. How are you off? And yeah, you working. There we go. And it was evident that he not only knew everyone in the drawing room, but it found them to be so tiresome that it wearied him to look at them or listen to them. And among all these faces that he found so tedious, none seemed to bore him as much as that of his pretty wife. He turned away from her with a grimace that distorted his handsome face, and kissed Anna Pavlovna's hand, and screwing up his eyes, scanned the whole party. "You're off to the war, Prince," said Anna Pavlovna. "General Kutuzov," said Bolkonsky, speaking French and stressing the last syllable of the general's name like a Frenchman, "has been pleased to take me as an aide-de-camp." "And Lise, your wife? She will go to the country. Are you not ashamed as to deprive us of your charming wife?" "Andres," said his wife, addressing her husband in the same coquettish manner in which she spoke to the other men, "the Vicomte has been telling us such a tale about Mademoiselle George and Bonaparte." Prince Andrew screwed up his eyes and turned away. Pierre, from the moment Prince Andrew entered the room, had watched him with glad, affectionate eyes, now came up and took his arm. Before he looked around, Prince Andrew frowned again, expressing his annoyance with whoever was touching his arm, but when he saw Pierre's beaming face, he gave him an unexpectedly kind and pleasant smile. "There now, so you too are in the great world," said he to Pierre. "I knew you would be here," replied Pierre. "I will come to supper with you, may I?" he added in a low voice, as to not disturb the Vicomte, who was continuing his story. "No, impossible," said Prince Andrew, laughing and pressing Pierre's hand to show that there was no need to ask the question. He wished to say something more, but at that moment Prince Vasily and his daughter got up to go, and the two young men rose to let them pass. "You must excuse me, dear Vicomte," said Prince Vasily to the Frenchman, holding him down by the sleeve in a weird, friendly way to prevent his rising. "This unfortunate fete at the ambassador's deprives me of a pleasure. It obliges me to interrupt you. I am very sorry to leave your enchanting party," said he, turning to Anna Pavlovna. His daughter, Princess Helene, passed between the chairs, lightly holding up the folds of her dress, and the smile shone still more radiantly on her beautiful face. Pierre gazed at her with rapturous, almost frightened eyes as she passed him. "Very lovely," said Prince Andrew. "Very," said Pierre. In passing, Prince Vasily seized Pierre's hand and said to Anna Pavlovna, "Educate this bear for me. He has been staying with me a whole month, and this is the first I have seen him in society. Nothing is so necessary for a young man as the society of clever women." Anna Pavlovna smiled and promised to take Pierre in hand. She knew his father to be a connection of Prince Vasily's. The elderly lady who had been sitting with the old aunt rose hurriedly and overtook Prince Vasily in the anteroom. All of the affection of interest she had assured had left her kindly and tear-worn face, and now it only expressed anxiety and fear. "How about my son, Boris, Prince?" said she, hurrying to him into the anteroom. "I can't remain any longer in Petersburg. Tell me what news I may take back to my poor boy." Although Prince Vasily listened reluctantly and not very politely to the elderly lady, even betraying some impatience, she gave him an ingratiating and appealing smile and took his hand that he might not go away. "What would it cost you to say a word to the Emperor, and then he would be transferred to the guards at once?" said she. "Believe me, Princess, I am ready to do all I can," answered Prince Vasily, "but it is difficult for me to ask the Emperor. I should advise you to appeal to Rumyantsev through Prince Golitsyn. That would be the best way." The elderly lady was a Princess Drubetskaya, belonging to one of the best families in Russia. But she was poor, having long been out of society and lost her former influential connections. She had now come to Petersburg to procure an appointment in the guards for her only son. It was, in fact, to solely meet Prince Vasily that she had obtained an invitation to Anna Pavlovna's reception, and had sat listening to the Vicomte's story. Prince Vasily's words frightened her. An embittered look clouded her once handsome face, but only for a moment. Then she smiled and clutched Prince Vasily's arm once more tightly. "Listen to me, Prince," said she, "and I have never yet asked you for anything, and I will never will again, nor have I reminded you of my father's friendship to you. But now I entreat you, for God's sake, to do this for my son, and I shall always regard you as a benefactor." She added hurriedly, No, don't be angry, but promise. I have asked Golitsyn, and he has refused. Be the kind-hearted man you always were, she said, trying to smile through her tears in her eyes. Papa, we shall be late, said Princess Helene, turning her beautiful head and looking over her classically molded shoulder as she stood waiting in the doorway. Influence in society, however, is a capital which has to be economized if it is to last. Prince Vasily knew this, and having once realized that if he asked on behalf of all who begged of him, he would soon be unable to ask for himself, he became chary of using his influence. But in Princess Drubetskaya's case, he felt, after a second appeal, something like qualms of conscience. She had reminded him of what was quite true, that he had been indebted to her father for the first steps in his career. Moreover, he could see by her manners that she was one of those women, mostly mothers, who, having once made up their minds, will not rest until they have gained their end, and are prepared, if necessary, to go on insisting day after day and hour after hour, even to make scenes. This last conversation moved him. My dear Anna Mikhailovna, there we go, said with his usual familiarity and weariness of tone, it is almost impossible for me to do what you ask, but to prove my devotion to you and how I respect your father's memory, I will do the impossible. Your son shall be transferred to the guards. Here is my hand on it. Are you satisfied? My dear benefactor, this is what I expected from you. I knew of your kindness. He turned to go. Wait, just the words. When he has been transferred to the guards, she faltered. You are on good terms with Michael Ilyarnovich Kuznetsov. Recommend Boris to him as an adjutant. Then I shall be at rest, and then Prince Vasily smiled. No, I won't promise that. You don't know how Kuznetsov has pestered since his appointment as commander-in-chief. He told me himself that all the Moscow ladies have conspired to give him all their sons as adjutants. No, but do promise I won't let you go, my dear benefactor. Papa, said his beautiful daughter in the same tone as before, we shall be late. Au revoir. Goodbye. You hear her? Then tomorrow you will speak to the Emperor? Certainly. What about Kuznetsov? I do not promise. Do promise. Do promise, Vasily, cried Anna Mikhailovna as he went, with a smile of a coquettish girl, which at one time probably came naturally to her, but was now ill-suited to her careworn face. Apparently she had forgotten her age, and by force of habit employed all of the old feminine arts. But as soon as the prince had gone, her face had resumed its former cold, artificial expression. She returned to the group where the Vicomte was still talking, and again pretended to listen while waiting till it would be time to leave. Her task was accomplished. Chapter 5. And what do you think of the latest comedy, The Coronation at Milan? Asked Anna Pavlovna. And of the comedy of the people of Genoa and Lucca, laying their petitions before Monsieur Bonaparte, and Monsieur Bonaparte sitting on a throne, and granting petitions of the nations. Adorable. It is enough to make one's head whirl. It is as if the whole world has gone crazy. Prince Andrew looked at Anna Pavlovna straight in the face with a sarcastic smile. Du milledon, Gariaki Latouche. They say he was very fine when he said that. He remarked, repeating the words in Italian, Duomi ladato, guayaci latoci. I hope this will prove the last drop that will make the glass run over, Anna Pavlovna continued. The sovereigns will not be able to endure this man, who is a menace to everything. The sovereigns? I do not speak of Russia, said the Vicomte, polite but hopeless. The sovereigns, madame, what they have done for Louis XVII, for the Queen, for Madame Elizabeth, nothing. And he became more animated. And believe me, they are reaping the reward of their betrayal of the Bourbon cause, the sovereigns. Why, they're sending their ambassadors to compliment the usurper. And sighing disdainfully, he changed his opinion. Prince Hippolyte, who had been gazing at the Vicomte for some time through his lorgnette, turned completely around toward the little princess, and having asked for a needle, began tracing the Conde coat of arms on the table. He explained to her with as much gravity as if she asked him to do it, Vatan de gules en grelle de gules de azur, my son Conde, said he. The princess listened, smiling. If Bonaparte remains on the throne of France a year longer, the Vicomte continued, the air of a man in which he is much better acquainted than anyone else, does not listen to others, but follows the current of his own thoughts. Things will have gone too far. By intrigues, violence, exile, and executions, French society, and I mean good French society, will have been forever destroyed, and then he shrugged his shoulders and spread out his hands. Pierre wished to make a remark, for the conversation interested him. But Anna Pavlovna, who had him under observation, interrupted. The Emperor Alexander, said she, with the melancholy which she always accompanied with any reference of hers to the imperial family, has declared he will leave it up to the French people themselves to choose their own form of government. And I believe once free from the usurper, the whole nation will certainly throw itself into the arms of its rightful king. She concluded, trying to be amiable to the royalist emigrant. That is doubtful, said Prince Andrew. Monsieur le Vicomte quite rightly supposes that matters have already gone too far. It will be difficult to return to the old regime, from what I have heard, said Pierre, blushing and breaking into the conversation. Almost all the aristocracy has gone over to Bonaparte's side. It is the Bonapartists who say that, replied the Vicomte without looking at Pierre. At this present time, it is difficult to know the real state of French public opinion. Bonaparte has said so, remarked Prince Andrew with a sarcastic smile. It was evident that he did not like the Vicomte, and was aiming his remarks at him, though without looking at him. I showed him the path of glory, but they did not allow it, Prince Andrew continued after a short silence, again quoting Napoleon's words. I opened my antechambers, and they crowded in. I do not know how far he was justified in saying so. Not in the least, replied the Vicomte. After the murder of the Duke, even the most partial ceased to regard him as a hero. If to some people, he went on, turned in Anna Pavlovna, if he ever was a hero. After the murder of the Duke, there was one martyr more in heaven and one hero less on earth. Before Anna Pavlovna and the others had time to smile their appreciation of the Vicomte's epigram, Pierre broke again into the conversation, though Anna Pavlovna felt for sure he would say something inappropriate. She was unable to stop him. The execution of the Duc d'Enghien, declared Monsieur Pierre, was a political necessity. And it seems to me that Napoleon showed the greatness of soul by not fearing to take it on himself, the whole responsibility. Mon Dieu, muttered Anna Pavlovna in a terrified whisper. What, Monsieur Pierre? Do you consider that assassination shows greatness of soul? Said the little princess, smiling and drawing her work near her. Oh, exclaimed several voices. Capital, said Prince Hippolyte in English, and began slapping the knee with the palm of his hand. The Vicomte merely shrugged his shoulders. Pierre looked solemnly at his audience over the spectacles and continued, I say so, he continued desperately, because the Bourbons fled from the revolution, leaving the people to anarchy, and Napoleon alone understood the revolution and quelled it, and for the general good. He could not stop short for the sake of one man's life. Won't you come over to the other table, suggested Anna Pavlovna, but Pierre continued his speech without heeding her. No, cried he, becoming more and more eager. Napoleon is great because he rose superior to the revolution, suppressed his abuses, and preserved all that was good in it, equality of citizenship and freedom of speech and of the press, and only for that reason did he obtain power. Yes, if having obtained power without availing himself of it to commit murder, he had restored it to the rightful king, I should have called him a great man, remarked the Vicomte. He could not do that. The people only gave him the power because it might rid them of the Bourbons, and because they saw that he was a great man. And the revolution was a grand thing, continued Monsieur Pierre. Betraying by this desperate and provocative proposition his extreme youth and his wish to express all that was in his mind. What, regicide and revolution, a grand thing? Well, after that. But won't you come to the other table, repeated Anna Pavlovna. Rousseau's Contrat Social, said the Vicomte with a tolerant smile. I am not speaking of regicide. I am speaking of ideas. Yes, ideals of robbery, murder, and regicide, again interjected an ironical voice. Those were extremes, no doubt, but they are not what is most important. What is important are the rights of man, emancipation from prejudices, and equality of citizenship. All of these ideas that Napoleon has retained in full force. Liberty and equality, said the Vicomte contemptuously, as if at last deciding seriously to prove to this youth how foolish his words were. High-sounding words which has long been discredited. Who does not love liberty and equality? Even our Savior preached liberty and equality. Have people since the revolution become happier? On the contrary, we wanted liberty, but Bonaparte has destroyed it. Prince Andrew kept looking an amused smile from Pierre to the Vicomte, and from the Vicomte to their hostess. In the first moment of Pierre's outburst, Anna Pavlovna, despite her social experience, was horror-struck. But when she saw that Pierre's sacrilegious words had not exasperated the Vicomte, and that convinced herself that it was impossible to stop him, She rallied her forces and joined the Vicomte in a vigorous attack on the orator. "But, my dear Monsieur Pierre," said she, "how do you explain the fact of a great man executing a duke, or even an ordinary man who is innocent and untried?" "I should like," said the Vicomte, "to ask how Monsieur explains the 18th Brumaire. Was that not an imposture? It was a swindle, and not at all like the conduct of a great man. And the princess and the prisoners that he killed in Africa, that was horrible," said the little princess. "He is a low fellow, say what you will," remarked Prince Hippolyte. Pierre, not knowing whom to answer, looked at them all and smiled. His smile was unlike the half smile of other people. When he smiled, his grave, even rather gloomy, look was instantaneously replaced by another, a childlike, a kindly, even rather silly look which seemed to ask forgiveness. The Vicomte, who was meeting him for the first time, saw clearly that this young Jacobin was not so terrible as his words suggested. All were silent. "How do you expect him to answer you all at once?" said Prince Andrew. "Besides the action of a statesman, one has to distinguish his acts between a private person as a general and as an emperor, so it seems to me." Yes, of course," Pierre chimed in, pleased at the arrival of this reinforcement. "One must admit," continued Prince Andrew, "that Napoleon as a man was great on the bridge of Arcola, and in the hospital at Jaffa, where he gave his hand to the plague-stricken. But there are other acts which it is difficult to justify." Prince Andrew, who had evidently wished to tone down the awkwardness of Pierre's remarks, rose and made a sign to his wife that it was time to go. Suddenly, Prince Hippolyte started making signs to everyone to attend, asking them all to be seated again. "I was told a charming Moscow story that I must treat you to it. Excuse me, Vicomte. I must tell it in Russian, or the point will be lost." And Prince Hippolyte began telling his story in such Russian as a Frenchman would speak after spending a year in Russia. Everyone waited so emphatically and eagerly that he did demand their attention to this story. "There is in Moscow a lady, Don, and she is very stingy. She must have 2 footmen behind her carriage, and very big ones. That was her taste. And she had a lady's maid, also big," she said. Here Prince Hippolyte paused, evidently collecting his ideas with difficulty. "She said, oh yes, she said, 'Girl,' to the maid, 'put on a livery, get up behind the carriage, and come with me as I make some calls.'" Here Prince Hippolyte sputtered and burst out laughing long before his audience, which produced an effect unfavorable to the narrator. Several persons, among them the elderly lady and Anna Pavlovna, did, however, smile. She went. Suddenly there was a great wind. The girl lost her hat, and her long hair came down. Here he could contain himself no longer, and went on between gasps of laughter. And the whole world knew, and so the anecdote ended. Though it was unintelligible why he had told it, or why it had to be told in Russian, still Anna Pavlovna and the others appreciated Prince Hippolyte's social tact in so agreeably ending Pierre's unpleasant and unamiable outburst. After the anecdote, the conversation broke into insignificant small talk about the last and next balls, about theatricals, and who would meet whom, when, and where. Chapter 6. Having thanked Anna Pavlovna for her charming soiree, the guests began to make their leave. Pierre was ungainly, snout about the average height, broad with huge red hands. He did not know, as the saying is, how to enter a drawing room, and still less how to leave one. That is, how to say something particularly agreeable before going away. Besides this, he was absent-minded. When he rose to go, he took up, instead of his own, the general's three-cornered hat and held it, pulling at the plume till the general asked him to restore it. All his absent-mindedness and inability to enter a room and converse in it was, however, redeemed by his kindly, simple, and modest expression. Anna Pavlovna turned toward him, and with a Christian mildness that expressed forgiveness at his indiscretion, nodded and said, "I hope to see you again, but I also hope you will change your opinions, my dear Monsieur Pierre." When she said this, he did not reply and only bowed, but again everyone saw his smile, which said nothing, unless perhaps opinions are opinions. But you see what a capital, good-natured fellow I am. And everyone, including Anna Pavlovna, felt this. Prince Andrew had gone out into the hall, and turning his shoulders to the footman, who was helping him on with his cloak, listened indifferently to his wife's chatter with Prince Hippolyte, who had also come into the hall. Prince Hippolyte stood close to the pretty pregnant princess and stared fixedly at her through his eyeglass. "When Annette, or you will catch a cold," said the little princess, taking leave of Anna Pavlovna. "It is settled," she said in a low voice. Anna Pavlovna had already managed to speak to Lise about the match she contemplated between Anatoly and the little princess's sister-in-law. "I rely on you, my dear," said Anna Pavlovna in a low tone. "Write to her, and let me know how her father looks at the matter. Au revoir." And she left the hall. Prince Hippolyte approached the little princess, and, bending his face close to her, began to whisper something. Two footmen, the princess's and his own, stood holding a shawl and a cloak, waiting for the conversation to finish. They also listened to the French sentences, which to them were meaningless, with an air of understanding, but not wishing to appear to do so. The princess, as usual, spoke smilingly and listened with a laugh. "I am very glad I did not go to the ambassador's," said Prince Hippolyte. "So dull." "It has been a delightful evening, has it not?" "Delightful." "They say the ball will be very good," replied the princess, drawing up her downy little lip. "All the pretty little women in society will be there." "Not all, for you will not be there, so not all," said Prince Hippolyte, smiling joyfully, and snatching the shawl from the footman, whom he pushed aside, and began wrapping it around the princess, either from awkwardness or intentionally, no one could have said which. After the shawl had been adjusted, he kept his arm around her for a long time, as though embracing her. Still smiling, she gracefully moved away, turning and glancing at her husband. Prince Andrew's eyes were closed, so weary and sleepy he seem. "Are you ready?" asked his wife, looking past her. Prince Hippolyte hurriedly put on his coat, which in the latest fashion reached to his very heels, and stumbling on it, ran out onto the porch, following the princess, whom a footman was helping into the carriage. "Ah, princesse, au revoir," cried he, stumbling with his tongue as well as his feet. The princess, picking up her dress, was taking her seat in the dark carriage, and her husband was adjusting his saber. Prince Hippolyte, under the pretense of helping, was in everyone's way. "Allow me, sir," said Prince Andrew, in Russian in a cold, disagreeable tone to Prince Hippolyte, who was blocking his path. "I am expecting you, Pierre," said the same tone, but gently and affectionately. The procession started, and the carriage wheels rattled. Prince Hippolyte laughed spasmodically as he stood on the porch waiting for the Vicomte, whom he had promised to take home. "Well, mon cher," said the Vicomte, having seated himself beside the Hippolyte in the carriage, "your little princess is very nice indeed, quite French." And he kissed the tips of his fingers. Hippolyte burst out laughing. "Do you know that you are a terrible chap, for all of your innocent airs?" continued the Vicomte. "I pity the poor husband, that little officer who gives himself the airs of a monarch." Hippolyte spurted again. "And you were saying Russian ladies are not equal to the French? One has to know how to deal with them." Pierre, reaching the house that first went into Prince Andrew's study like one quite at home, and from habit immediately lay down on the sofa, took from the shelf the first book that came to his hand, and it was Caesar's Commentaries. Resting on his elbow, began reading it in the middle. "What have you done to Mademoiselle Scherer? She will be quite ill now," said Prince Andrew, as he entered the study, rubbing his small white hands. Pierre turned his whole body, making the sofa creak. He lifted his eager face to Prince Andrew, smiled, and waved his hand. "The Abbé is very interesting, but he does not see the thing in the right light. In my opinion, perpetual peace is possible, but I do not know how to express it, not by a balance of political power." It was evident that Prince Andrew was not interested in such an abstract conversation. "One can't everywhere say what all one thinks, mon cher." "Well, have you at least decided on anything? Are you going to be a guardsman or a diplomatist?" asked Prince Andrew after a momentary silence. Pierre sat up on the sofa with his legs tucked under him. "Really, I don't know. I don't like either one or the other." "But you must decide on something. Your father expects it." Pierre, at the age of 10, had been sent abroad with an abbé as tutor, and had remained away till he was 20. When he returned to Moscow, his father dismissed the abbé and said to the young man, "Now go to Petersburg, look around and choose your profession. I will agree to anything. Here is a letter to Prince Vasily, and here is money. Write to me all about it, and I will help you in everything." Pierre had already been choosing a career for 3 months, and had not decided on anything. It was about this choice that Prince Andrew was speaking. Pierre rubbed his forehead. But he must be a Freemason, said he, referring to the abbé whom he had met that evening. Oh, that is all nonsense. Prince Andrew again interrupted him. Let us talk business. Have you been to the Horse Guards? No, I have not, but this is what I've been thinking and wanted to tell you. There is a war now against Napoleon. If it were a war for freedom, I could understand it and would be the first to enter the army. But to help England and Austria against the greatest man in the world is not right. Pierre only shrugged his shoulders at... No, Prince Andrew only shrugged his shoulders at Pierre's childish words. He put on an air of one who finds it impossible to reply to such nonsense, but it would have been in fact difficult to give any other answer than the one Prince Andrew gave to this naive question. If no one fought except on his own conviction, there would be no wars. And that would be splendid, said Pierre. Prince Andrew smiled ironically. Very likely it would be splendid, but it will never come about. Well, why are you going to the war? Asked Pierre. What for? Well, I don't know. I must. Besides that I am going. He paused. I am going because the life I am leading here does not suit me. All right. That is going to be 3 chapters more. I am going to conclude here with this one because, let's face it, this book gets a little heavy. As you heard, I shifted between 3 languages yet again. No, 4. Just reading in regular English, having to speak phrases in French and Italian, and just the standard Russian. But to say, all of those stories is basically Pierre. You can tell he's a bit naive, like what you'll see later on in the October Revolution. Is he an idiot? Not really, but he has trouble. But in that same token, Andrew is going off to the war because, as you can tell, he's bored with his pregnant wife. He's bored with his royal life. He's just bored. And that's all there is to it. He doesn't know what he wants to do or how he wants to do it. So, next Tuesday we'll cover chapters 7, I want to say 7 through 9. I'll see how it goes, but you can find this replay on Thursdays on my YouTube channel, Roulette Productions. I am also have a podcast, Blue Collar Philosophy. Find that on Apple or Google or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Twitter, Blue Collar JM. But I do thank you for watching this, whether here or on YouTube. And every one of you should have a good day.